First, France was involved in wars over long years that led to these financial resources decreasing. In fact, it had drained the treasury in France. Second, huge sums of money was spent in maintaining the immense palace of Versailles. Third, Louis XVI himself helped the 13 American colonies to gain independence from Britain. This increased the debt, and lenders began to charge 10% interest on loans. How was France to meet this expenditure? To meet this expenditure, the state was forced to raise and increase taxes. In the 18th century, French society was divided into three estates: the clergy, the nobles, and the commons. What was peculiar about this society was that the first two estates, the clergy and the nobles, who owned 60% of land, enjoyed certain privileges by birth. Example, they did not pay taxes to the state. Only members of the third estate, who made up 90% of the population, were mostly peasants. They paid all the taxes. What a strange policy. The Society of Estates was part of the feudal system that dated back to the Middle Ages. Let us see what taxes the third estate had to pay. They had to pay direct and indirect taxes to the state. They paid feudal dues too. The nobles tried to extract as much dues as possible, so much so that peasants preferred to work for the nobles, work in their houses and fields, in the army, or serve in building roads. Why? This was just to escape from paying extra tax. To add to the misery of the peasants, even the church taxed the peasants. All members of the third estate had to pay taxes to the state. We move on to the struggle to survive. Between 1715 and 1789, the population of France increased by 5 million. What was the result? It had far-reaching consequences. This led to the rapid increase in the demand for food grains. However, the production of food grain could not keep pace with the demand. Thus, the price of bread, the staple food of the French, rose rapidly. Most workers were laborers in workshops, whose wages were fixed. So the wages did not keep pace with the rise in prices. The gap between the rich and the poor widened. This led to subsistence crisis. What is subsistence crisis? This is an extreme situation where the basic means of livelihood are endangered. This was a frequent occurrence in France during the old regime. We have read about peasants and workers who took part in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity. They never succeeded in making an impact as they lacked coordination and leadership. So they could not carry out full-scale protests that would bring about changes in the social and economic orders. However, the situation changed with the emergence of a new social order, the middle class. They earned their wealth through expanding overseas trade. This order was not only rich and educated, but also liberal minded. These included lawyers, administrative officials, merchants, and manufacturers. They too belonged to the third estate. They were known as the middle class elites. Their belief was that no group in society should be privileged by birth. Rather, social position must depend on one's merit. Philosophers like Locke and Rousseau spread ideas of a society based on freedom, equal laws, and equal opportunities for all. Division of power within the government, that is, the executive, legislature, and judiciary. How did these ideas spread among the people? These ideas began to be discussed in saloons and coffee shops, and even spread through books and newspapers. To those who could not read or write, these ideas were read aloud. The worst news read aloud was when Louis XVI planned to impose new taxes in order to meet the expenses of the state. This news generated anger and protest against the system of privileges. Good morning, class 9. Turn to page 8. The second topic, the outbreak of the revolution. In the French old regime, the king did not have the power to impose new taxes according to his free will. He had to call a meeting of the Estates General, which would then pass his proposal for new taxes. What was the Estates General? It was a political body to which the three estates sent their representatives. On 5th May 1789, Louis XVI called for an assembly of the Estates General. He wanted them to pass his proposals for new taxes. There were 300 members from the clergy and nobles, and 600 from the third estate. The third estate was represented by its prosperous and educated members. How was the voting done in the past? Voting in the Estates General followed the principle that each state had one vote. Louis XVI wanted to follow the same principle, but the members of the third estate demanded that voting be conducted by the assembly as a whole. One member, one vote. Louis XVI rejected this proposal. The members of the third estate staged a walkout from the assembly. On 20th June, they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in Versailles. They swore not to leave the place till a constitution was drafted, and that constitution would limit the powers of the king. This came to be known as the tennis court oath. While the assembly was drafting a constitution, the rest of France was in great turmoil. Why? The severe winter resulted in a bad harvest. The price of bread rose. Bakers exploited the situation and hoarded supplies. Women spent hours in long queues at the bakery. Anger turned to frustration, which resulted in women storming the shops. As troops were sent to Paris, on 14th July, an angry mob stormed and destroyed the Bastille. Rumors spread that the lords sent musclemen to destroy the ripe crops. This news spread quickly. In a frenzy, the peasants attacked castles and stately residences of noblemen. They looted hoarded grain and burnt all documents containing records of manorial dues. Many nobles fled while some left France. Finally, Louis XVI recognized the National Assembly. He accepted that his powers would be checked by a constitution. On 4th August 1789, a law was passed abolishing the feudal system. The clergy were forced to give up their privileges. The church tax was abolished and lands owned by the church were confiscated. The results were staggering. The assets mounted to over 2 billion livres, that is the French currency. We move on to 2.1. It says, France becomes a constitutional monarchy. The drafting of the constitution was completed in 1791. What was its main object? The main object was to limit the powers of the king. These powers were to be distributed to the legislature, the executive, and judiciary. This made France a constitutional monarchy. The constitution gave powers to the National Assembly to make laws. This assembly was indirectly elected. However, there was one drawback in this constitution. Not all the citizens had the right to vote. Only men above 25 years of age who paid taxes equal to at least 3 days of a laborer's wages were considered active citizens and were entitled to vote. To get elected and become a member of the assembly, a man had to fall in the bracket of highest taxpayers. In simple words, the Constitution of 1791 was for the wealthy class of citizens. The common people and women were left out and had no right to vote nor get elected. The Constitution began with the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. What was the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen? It contained the right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before the law. These ideals were considered as natural rights. They were also considered as alienable. Why alienable? It means these rights belong to each human being by birth and could not be taken away. It was the duty of the state to protect each citizen's natural rights. Students, go through source C on page 11 in your text. Secondly, turn to pages 12 and 13. You will find some political symbols. Go through these symbols and see what each symbol means. There is an activity I'm giving you to do. Identify the symbols which stand for liberty, equality, and fraternity.